Hello, Scott Brinkley here with Nexstar. So if you're watching this, this is the video tutorial of the Nexstar turnover tracker, and it also has the value of a turnover built into it. So, a lot of shops track their turnover rate, but they track it on all calls, meaning that if a shop runs, or if a technician runs 60 calls in a month and he turns over, let's just say if he turns over, six, well, he's at a 10% turnover rate. There's an issue with doing that because we don't know of those 60 calls he ran, how many were pieces of aged equipment or how many were turnover opportunities. So depending on the market, how many was over 8 years or over 10 years old. So this is why we don't track it on all calls, or you can track it on all calls, but you still have to track it on based on opportunities. Because on the surface, if you got two techs, both ran 60 and turned over six, they both have a 10% turnover rate. But once you dig in, what happens if you find out that one tech, right, of those 60 calls, let's say that he only had 10 opportunities, I mean 10 pieces or 10 calls where the equipment was considered aged or old enough to look at being replaced. So if he had 10 opportunities and turned over 6, well, he's truly at a 60% turnover rate based on the opportunities. While the other guy, what happens if he ran, 60 calls, and of those 60, what if 30 of them were opportunities? Well, then obviously it's a huge difference. So that's why looking at turnovers on all calls just doesn't cut it, because you're going to make some bad decisions. So let me walk you through this setup. It's pretty simple. So right here it says the first. This is the day of the month, first, second, third, all the way across. So you don't do anything there. What you do is you put the date in here. So whatever the date is, you put it in here. Okay. Technicians, you actually put the names here. So let's go ahead and say we got a few techs. We got Frank, Peter, Paul, let's say Mary. Okay. Now here, if you scroll over, there are instructions, but obviously if you're watching this tutorial, you don't have to worry about those. So here you want to put on the first, how many opportunities did Frank run? Meaning how many pieces of equipment did he run that was older than 10 years old? If it's a gas market, if it's a heat pump market, be older than 8 years old. So let's go ahead and say Frank ran here. Let's say Frank ran um, 3 calls, and of those 3, let's say he turned over 2, right? And so this information here typically comes from a dispatcher, dispatcher service manager. They input this in, and meaning these 2 columns. These 3 columns normally come from a sales lead coordinator. So this would be, well, how many turnovers did Frank have ran by comfort advisors? You know, so let's say that, comfort advisors might have ran 10 turnovers, and of those 10, 2 might have been Frank's, right? 1 might have been Frank's. Well, the other thing is, let's say, for example, Frank could have had 3 ran turnovers. And you might say, well, how does he have 3 ran if he only turned over 2? Well, sometimes they book turnovers out. So of these 3 ran, 2 could have been from today, 1 from another day. Or these all could have been from a different day, and none of these 2 were from today. So it really doesn't matter. But so again, these numbers here in these first 2 columns, these normally come from a dispatcher or service manager. These 3 columns typically come from a sales lead coordinator who enters these. And I say enters them. Normally a sales lead coordinator just emails the results to the dispatcher every day. She enters in these first 2 columns, he enters in the next 2. So let's go ahead and do some of these. So look, let's say Frank did have 3 turnovers ran, and of those 3, 2 were closed. Let's just say it's $12,000. Let's say Peter had 3 opportunities, turned over 1. Let's say he had 1 ran, none was sold. Let's go ahead and say Paul had, 3 ran, 3 turned over, 2 were ran today from Comfort Advisors. Let's say 2 sold, $15,000. So you enter this every day. And I'm going to go ahead and enter in a few more days just so we can show you what to do. So once you enter these in every day, you see down here it says who to send. This is the tab that you click it and you print this off. The dispatcher and the service manager, they print this off and they sit down every day and they use it. It tells them who to dispatch to the calls. So let me go ahead and enter a few more here. Let's say that, Frank ran 3, and now you might have, like 4 or 5 other techs here. Let's go ahead and enter a few more. Keith, let's say Kerry. All right, and we'll go ahead and say that these people actually ran a few, one each, and they didn't have any results, just to show you what that looks like. So over here, I'm going to show you, and as you scroll right, you see I have the names hidden. Okay, so that way it makes it easy on you to keep entering this in. So let's say Frank had 3 ran, again, converted 2. Let's say he had 2 turned over, 1 sold, 8,000. Peter, and the reason that I'm giving these top 3 people more is because let's say they're actually doing a good job of showing who to dispatch. So they've been using this program for a while, and so because you don't want to just evenly send everybody to every call. And first of all, that's why you got to get the age of the the call in the call center so you know who to send to them. Let's say Peter ran 3, turned over 1, 1 ran, none sold. Paul, let's say he 3, let's say he went ahead and turned over 2, had 2 ran, 2 sold. Let's just say 13 grand. Okay, and let's go ahead and give a few of these. Let's say Mary ran 1, turned over 1, but it hasn't ran by a comfort advisor. And let's do this. Okay, so I've entered in 2 days worth of data. So I'm going to go ahead and click the dispatch screen. Again, you just do this. You save it every day. You enter this in. The dispatcher and then the service manager, now what they do is they literally print this out, and this is going to tell you who to send, to the call. So let me go ahead and enter in 3 days worth of data, and I'll show you something here. So I now have 3 days worth of data in here. So by doing this, let me show you who to send. So again, so every day, once you enter this information in, the dispatcher and the service manager sit down together. They print this out, this who to send sheet. They print it out. They put it on the wall. So if you look, just to show you, Frank is turning over 67% of his opportunities. So basically, every time he runs a call that is above, or considered aged equipment, right? He's turning over 67% of those into a lead. Right now, he says he's got a negative 17% cancellation. Well, how can you have a negative cancellation? Well, the reason it's a negative is because he's basically, comfort advisors have ran more leads than he's turned over. You might say, well, how does that happen? Well, this, is the beginning of the month. We've only got 3 days entered in here. And so therefore, he might have had leads from, booked on the 30th or 31st that we ran on the 1st or 2nd. The comfort advisors are closing 57%, right, of his calls that they run. And then this is the value of the dispatch, right? So if you look at that, value of opportunity dispatch. So every time we send Frank to a lead, he's averaging, the final result is $2,800. And that means that, obviously it doesn't mean that every average ticket that they sell is $2,800. This means every time we dispatch him, by the time it goes through the system, we're averaging bringing $2,800 in on Frank. So if you look at Peter, so Peter's turning over 33% into a lead. He's got 0% cancellation. That means they're all running, right? But they're only closing a third of his. And his average dispatch is 500. So if you look at these two, you might think, well, they're not that far off. Or here's a good example. If you look at this, Mary's turning over 50%, right? None of hers have canceled, so she's similar to Peter. And they're closing 100% of hers, so here's $1,600. So if you look at this value of opportunity dispatch, this tells you who to send. So the number one guy to send if we came in today, we only had 3 or 4 turnover opportunities, let's give them 100% of them to Paul. Every time we dispatch Paul to a call, he's averaging $4,700. So the way this works is, again, this gets printed out every day, and they look at this and they sit down together. The service manager and the dispatcher sit down and go, all right, well, how many opportunities do we have today? And if they go, we got 9. Well, if that's the case, let's give 3 or 4, if we could, to Paul. Well, let's go ahead and give 3 or 4 to Frank. And if we got 9 and we can give them both 4 apiece, then let's go ahead and give 1 to Mary. And you might say, well, how come we didn't break it up 3, 3, and 3? Because if you look, every time I dispatch Mary to a call versus Paul, it cost me $3,100. Or every time I dispatch Mary to a call instead of Frank, if Frank can run it, look at that, it cost us $1,200. Every time we send Peter to a call, right, and look at that, versus Frank, it's going to cost you $2,300. So at this point, look, it says, don't send Peter any more calls. It's got an X right there. Get him out. Don't send him. The top 3 people to send are these 3. Okay, and so if we go back and look at the input tab, ironically, Peter has ran 3, 3, and 3. He's ran 9. Mary has only ran 1, 2. So Mary's ran 2. Okay, Peter's ran 3. So you got to really pay attention to these, because if nothing changes, they're just going to keep sending Peter to calls, and this thing says don't send him. In reality, Mary's the better person to send. All right, well, hope this helps. If you ever need me, just email me at scottb@nexstarnetwork.com. Thank you.